The fluorescent lights in Marcus Bennett's corner office cast harsh shadows across his weathered face as he delivered the words that would change everything. "Sarah, I need to be direct with you," he said, his fingers drumming against the mahogany desk that dominated the room. "The board has made their decision about the vice president of operations position." I sat perfectly still in the leather chair across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, maintaining the professional composure that had carried me through 12 years at Morrison Industrial Solutions. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, though my expression remained neutral. "We've decided to go with David Chen," Marcus continued, his voice carrying that particular tone executives use when they're about to justify the unjustifiable. "David brings a certain presence to leadership roles. The board feels he has the natural charisma that executive positions require." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. 12 years of navigating corporate politics had taught me to school my features into a mask of polite disappointment, even as fury coursed through my veins. David Chen, the golden boy who joined our company just 3 years ago with his MBA from Wharton and his perfectly pressed suits. The man who had never managed a single successful project launch, never worked a weekend, never stayed past 6 o'clock to ensure a client deadline was met. "I understand," I said, my voice steady and professional. "May I ask what specific areas I should focus on developing for future consideration?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly expecting a different reaction. Perhaps tears. Perhaps an emotional outburst that would confirm his assessment of my leadership capabilities. Instead, he faced the calm inquiry of someone who had spent over a decade mastering every aspect of operations management, someone who had personally overseen the implementation of the efficiency protocols that had saved Morrison Industrial $15 million in the past 2 years alone. "Well, Sarah, your technical expertise is unquestionable," he began, his words carefully measured. "Your operational knowledge is impressive, but leadership at the executive level requires something more intangible. Executive presence, the ability to command a room. David has that natural authority that comes across in board meetings." I nodded thoughtfully, as if his explanation made perfect sense. As if I hadn't spent the last 6 months presenting detailed quarterly reports to those same board meetings, while David sat silently taking notes. As if I hadn't been the one fielding complex operational questions, while he checked his phone under the conference table. "I appreciate the feedback," I replied, reaching for my portfolio. "I'll certainly take that into consideration moving forward." Marcus relaxed visibly, clearly relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. In his world, women who expressed disappointment were emotional, and women who expressed anger were difficult. I would be neither, not today. "I'm glad you understand, Sarah. You're a valuable member of our team, and we'll need your expertise to help David transition into his new role. Your knowledge of our systems will be crucial for his success." The irony wasn't lost on me. They needed my expertise to teach my replacement how to do the job they'd decided I wasn't qualified for. I stood smoothly, maintaining my professional smile, and placed a sealed envelope on his desk. "What's this?" Marcus asked, his brow furrowing as he looked at the cream-colored envelope bearing his name in my precise handwriting. "Just some thoughts I've compiled about the transition process," I said pleasantly. "I'd appreciate it if you could review it when you have a moment. I believe you'll find it illuminating." The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh, and I allowed myself exactly 3 deep breaths before the mask slipped back into place. My reflection stared back at me from the polished metal doors, and for a moment I saw not the composed professional I'd presented to Marcus, but the woman beneath, Sarah Patricia Rodriguez, 34 years old, the daughter of a factory worker and a school teacher who had clawed her way through state college on scholarships and sheer determination. The woman who had spent 12 years building Morrison Industrial's operational infrastructure from the ground up, who had transformed their antiquated supply chain management into a model of efficiency that other companies now tried to replicate. The woman who had just been passed over for promotion in favor of a man whose greatest achievement was looking good in a suit. My phone buzzed with a text message as I walked through the lobby. Linda Morrison, the CEO's daughter and head of human resources, had sent a simple message. Coffee? Usual place? 1 hour. I typed back a quick yes and continued toward the parking garage. Linda had been my ally for years. One of the few people in the executive tier who understood the subtle dynamics that kept women like me in supporting roles, while men like David advanced to leadership positions. If anyone would have insight into the board's decision, it would be her. The drive to Café Luna gave me time to process what had just happened. Morrison Industrial Solutions wasn't just any company to me. It was the place where I'd started as a junior analyst fresh out of college, eager to prove myself in the male-dominated world of industrial operations. It was where I'd worked 16-hour days during my first year, learning every system, every process, every inefficiency that plagued our manufacturing and distribution networks. I remembered my first major presentation, 6 months into my tenure, when I'd identified a critical flaw in our inventory management system that was costing the company thousands of dollars monthly in overstock and waste. The senior management team had listened politely, nodded appreciatively, and then assigned the implementation of my solution to Robert Hayes, a manager with 15 years of experience, and, more importantly, the right demographic profile for leadership visibility. Robert had taken full credit for the savings, of course. At the company holiday party that year, he'd been celebrated as an innovative thinker, while I'd been acknowledged with a generic team player award. I'd swallowed my frustration and focused on the work itself, believing that results would eventually speak louder than politics. That pattern had repeated itself countless times over the years. My analysis of supplier relationships had become, quote, Robert's vendor optimization initiative. My redesign of the quality control protocols had been presented as the management team's collaborative improvement project. My comprehensive cost reduction strategy had somehow become David's efficiency proposal during his second year with the company. Each time, I'd told myself it was part of paying dues, of proving my value to the organization. Each time, I'd worked harder, stayed later, produced better results. I'd earned my bachelor's degree in industrial engineering through night classes while working full-time. I'd completed an MBA in operations management through weekend and online programs, spending my free time buried in case studies and financial modeling, while my peers were building the social relationships that apparently mattered more than competence. Café Luna was nearly empty when I arrived, just the way Linda and I preferred it for our sensitive conversations. She was already seated at our usual corner table, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the stress I could see etched around her eyes. Linda Morrison Webb had inherited her father's sharp intellect but had been navigating corporate gender dynamics for even longer than I had. At 58, she'd seen enough qualified women passed over to recognize the patterns immediately. "How are you holding up?" she asked as I slid into the seat across from her, her voice gentle but direct. "I'm fine," I replied automatically, then caught myself. Linda deserved honesty. "Actually, I'm furious. But I'm fine." She smiled ruefully. "Good. Fury is appropriate. Fine is debatable." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She leaned forward, lowering her voice even though we were alone. "Sarah, I need you to know that I fought for you in that boardroom. Hard." "I appreciate that, Linda. I really do. But can you help me understand how David Chen, with his 3 years of experience and 0 successful project completions, was seen as more qualified than someone who's been carrying this company's operational load for over a decade?" Linda's expression darkened. "Because he went to Harvard Business School. Because he looks like what they think a vice president should look like. Because when he speaks in meetings, even when he's saying nothing substantive, it sounds authoritative to them." She paused, stirring her coffee absently. "And because Marcus Bennett has been grooming him since day one." That last piece hit me like a revelation. Marcus's mentorship of David hadn't been subtle, but I'd attributed it to normal management development. Now I saw it for what it really was. Systematic preparation for advancement, the kind of sponsorship that had never been offered to me despite my superior performance. "There's something else," Linda continued, her voice dropping even lower. The board meeting yesterday wasn't just about the VP position. There are bigger changes coming to Morrison Industrial. Changes that Marcus has been planning for months. My pulse quickened. What kind of changes? Restructuring. Consolidation of departments. They're looking to streamline operations across all our facilities. Linda met my eyes directly. The person who gets the VP role isn't just inheriting current responsibilities. They're going to be tasked with reimagining our entire operational structure. The irony was staggering. They'd chosen David to lead a transformation of the very systems I'd designed and optimized. They'd selected someone with no operational experience to restructure operations, no supply chain knowledge to manage supply chains, no quality control background to oversee quality improvements. How long do we have before this restructuring begins? I asked. 6 months, maybe less. Marcus wants to present the new structure to the board of directors at the quarterly meeting in December. That gives David time to develop his vision for the company's future. I almost laughed at the euphemism. Develop his vision. As if David had ever demonstrated any capacity for strategic thinking beyond copying what others had already created. Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I paused, choosing my words carefully. In your professional opinion, do you believe I have what it takes to be an effective vice president? Her response was immediate and emphatic. Sarah, you've been functioning as the de facto VP of operations for the past 3 years. You've been doing the job without the title, the recognition, or the compensation. The only difference between you and David is that you actually understand what you're doing. The validation felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders, even as it confirmed my worst suspicions about the company's decision-making process. I'd been performing at an executive level while being kept at a managerial level, contributing executive-level value while receiving managerial-level recognition. There's something I haven't told you yet, Linda said, glancing around the cafe to ensure we weren't being overheard. About the restructuring plans. Marcus has been consulting with external firms about the implementation. Specifically, he's been talking to Pinnacle Consulting Group. I knew Pinnacle's reputation. They were the corporate equivalent of battlefield surgeons, brought in to perform radical organizational surgery with little regard for the human cost. Their approach was to slash overhead, eliminate redundancies, and maximize short-term profitability regardless of long-term consequences. How extensive are we talking about? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. 30% reduction in middle management positions. Consolidation of 3 regional facilities into 2. Outsourcing of non-core functions. Linda's expression was grim. Sarah, they're planning to gut everything you've built. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted bitter. 12 years of my professional life, thousands of hours of analysis and optimization, relationships with suppliers and contractors, systems and processes that had saved the company millions of dollars. All of it about to be dismantled by consultants who would spend a few weeks conducting interviews before recommending wholesale changes. And David is supposed to oversee this? David is supposed to implement whatever Pinnacle recommends. Marcus wants someone who won't question the process, who'll follow directives without pushback. Linda's meaning was clear. They didn't want a leader who understood the intricacies of the operations. They wanted a manager who would execute orders without understanding their implications. That's when the pieces clicked into place for me. This wasn't just about passing me over for promotion. This was about installing someone who wouldn't interfere with Marcus's vision of corporate transformation. Someone who wouldn't have the expertise to challenge destructive recommendations or the authority to propose alternatives. They hadn't chosen David despite his lack of qualifications. They'd chosen him because of his lack of qualifications. There's one more thing, Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. The timeline for the restructuring isn't set in stone. If David can demonstrate early wins, show the board that he's capable of driving immediate improvements, they might accelerate the process. What kind of early wins? Cost reductions, efficiency improvements, quick fixes that demonstrate his value to the organization. She paused meaningfully. Basically, taking credit for everything you've already set in motion. The cynicism was breathtaking. My projects, my initiatives, my carefully planned improvements would become David's proof of concept for leadership. The cost savings I'd identified through months of analysis would be presented as his innovative thinking. The supplier relationships I'd cultivated would become evidence of his negotiation skills. I thought about the envelope I'd left on Marcus's desk, and for the first time since leaving his office, I allowed myself a small smile. Linda, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if someone with deep operational knowledge decided to pursue opportunities outside Morrison Industrial? She studied my face carefully. Hypothetically, it would be a significant loss for the company, particularly if that person had relationships with key suppliers, intimate knowledge of our systems, and insights into our strategic vulnerabilities. Her expression sharpened. Sarah, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that maybe it's time I stop trying to prove my worth to people who have already decided I don't have any. Linda leaned back in her chair, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. As head of human resources, she understood the implications of losing institutional knowledge. As someone who'd watched qualified women get passed over for decades, she also understood the justice of what I was contemplating. If you decide to explore other options, she said carefully, I want you to know that you'll have a glowing reference from me. And if you need any documentation of your contributions to Morrison Industrial, I can provide that as well. The offer was generous and risky for her. Providing documentation that could be used by a competitor or in a wrongful termination suit would put her own position in jeopardy. But Linda had always been willing to take calculated risks to support other women in the industry. I appreciate that more than you know, I told her. But I want you to promise me something. Whatever happens over the next few months, don't sacrifice your own position trying to protect mine. You've got 28 years invested in this company. And you've got 12 years invested in knowledge they can't replace, she countered. Sarah, Morrison Industrial doesn't deserve you. They never have. As I drove back to the office, Linda's words echoed in my mind. 12 years of knowledge they can't replace. It was true, but I'd never really considered the full implications of that fact. I wasn't just another employee who could be substituted. I was the repository of operational intelligence that had taken more than a decade to accumulate. I knew which suppliers could deliver on impossible timelines and which ones padded their schedules. I knew which manufacturing processes were running at optimal efficiency and which ones were held together by workarounds and prayer. I knew where the real cost savings could be found and where cutting expenses would create catastrophic failures 6 months down the line. Most importantly, I knew the difference between sustainable improvements and short-term fixes that would explode into larger problems. David Chen, for all his Harvard credentials and executive presence, knew none of this. Pinnacle Consulting, for all their analytical frameworks and strategic methodologies, would need months to discover what I'd learned through years of hands-on experience. The envelope on Marcus's desk contained more than just thoughts about the transition process. It contained my formal resignation letter, effective in 2 weeks, along with a detailed analysis of the operational challenges David would face in his new role. Challenges that would become apparent very quickly once I was no longer there to solve them quietly in the background. But resignation, I was beginning to realize, was just the first step. Over the years, I'd built relationships throughout the industry. Suppliers who trusted my judgment. Contractors who respected my expertise. Competitors who'd tried to recruit me multiple times, offering positions that Morrison Industrial had never seen fit to provide. For 12 years, I'd been loyal to a company that saw me as a supporting player in someone else's success story. Maybe it was time to start writing my own story instead. The Morrison Industrial parking garage was nearly empty when I returned, most of the executive team having left for their usual Thursday afternoon golf meetings. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, where my modest office sat among the middle management cubicles, a deliberate reminder of my place in the hierarchy despite my responsibilities that rivaled those of any senior executive. My assistant Jennifer looked up as I approached. "How did it go?" she asked, though my expression probably told her everything she needed to know. "About as expected," I replied. "Could you do me a favor and book the conference room for tomorrow afternoon? I need to meet with the operations team." "Of course. How long do you need it?" 2 hours. And Jennifer, make sure everyone knows it's mandatory. I have some important updates to share." As I settled into my office chair, I opened my laptop and began composing a series of emails. Not resignation letters or angry manifestos, but careful professional messages to contacts I'd maintained throughout the industry. Former colleagues who'd moved to other companies. Headhunters who'd reached out over the years. Suppliers who'd mentioned opportunities in passing. Each email was subtly worded, expressing interest in exploring new challenges and, quote, applying my expertise in different environments. Nothing that could be construed as disloyalty or inappropriate solicitation. Just a professional woman quietly testing the waters of opportunity. By 5 o'clock, I'd sent 12 emails. By 6 o'clock, I'd received responses from 4 different companies expressing immediate interest. By 7 o'clock, I had 3 informal interviews scheduled for the following week. The industry, it seemed, had been waiting for me to realize what I was worth. My phone rang as I was packing up for the evening. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't expected. Patricia Holbrook, Senior Vice President of Operations at Meridian Industries, Morrison's largest competitor. Sarah Rodriguez? Her voice was crisp and professional. This is Patricia Holbrook from Meridian Industries. I hope you don't mind the direct call, but I received your email this afternoon, and I was wondering if we could accelerate our timeline. Of course, I replied, intrigued by the urgency in her tone. I'll be direct. We've been watching Morrison Industrial's operations for some time, and frankly, we've been puzzled by their consistently strong performance given their management structure. Your email this afternoon helped clarify things considerably. She paused. Sarah, would you be available for lunch tomorrow? I'd like to discuss an opportunity that I think you'll find very interesting. I'd be very interested in hearing more. Excellent. 1 o'clock at the Riverside Club. And Sarah, I hope you understand that this conversation would be confidential, regardless of whether we move forward. After hanging up, I sat in my office as darkness fell outside the windows, processing the rapid developments of the day. This morning, I'd been a overlooked middle manager facing another disappointment in a long series of professional slights. Tonight, I was a sought-after industry expert with opportunities knocking at my door. The envelope on Marcus's desk would deliver its message in the morning. By the time he opened it, I would already be meeting with his biggest competitor to discuss opportunities that Morrison Industrial had never been willing to provide. For 12 years, I'd accepted their assessment of my value. I'd internalized their judgment about my leadership potential. I'd allowed them to define my worth based on their narrow vision of what executive material looked like. But tonight, as I locked my office door and walked toward the elevator, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The excitement of possibility. The thrill of being valued for what I could contribute, rather than diminished for what I supposedly lacked. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new opportunities, new ways of thinking about my professional future. Marcus Bennett and David Chen could have their restructuring plans and their executive presence and their Harvard MBA credentials. I had something more powerful, 12 years of expertise that they were about to discover they couldn't replace, combined with an industry reputation that they'd never bothered to recognize. Most importantly, I finally had clarity about my own worth, independent of their limited ability to see it. The game, as they say, was about to change completely. The morning sun filtered through the windows of my home office as I reviewed the quarterly reports I'd been generating for the past 5 years. Documents that told a story Morrison Industrial had never bothered to compile into a coherent narrative. Spread across my dining table were printouts, spreadsheets, and performance metrics that painted a picture of systematic excellence that had gone unrecognized for far too long. The numbers were staggering when viewed collectively. My initiatives had reduced operational costs by 23% over 4 years, while simultaneously improving quality metrics across all manufacturing lines. The supplier relationship restructuring I'd implemented had eliminated inventory waste by 41%, saving the company nearly $8 million annually. Most significantly, the cross-training protocols I'd developed had reduced production downtime by 67%, an achievement that had directly contributed to Morrison Industrial's reputation for reliability in an industry where missed deadlines could cost millions. Yet none of these accomplishments appeared in my official performance reviews. They'd been absorbed into departmental achievements, credited to team efforts, or simply acknowledged as part of normal operational improvements. I'd been so focused on doing excellent work that I'd failed to document how excellent that work actually was. My laptop chimed with an email from Patricia Holbrook confirming our lunch meeting and providing additional context that made my pulse quicken. Meridian Industries wasn't just interested in my operational expertise. They were launching an aggressive expansion into the Mid-Atlantic market, directly challenging Morrison Industrial's dominance in the region. They needed someone who understood Morrison's vulnerabilities, someone who could help them compete not just on price, but on operational superiority. The irony was delicious. Morrison Industrial had spent 12 years training me to be their most dangerous competitor. I printed Patricia's email and added it to the growing stack of documentation I was assembling. Not for litigation purposes, but for leverage. The corporate world might not value my contributions appropriately, but it definitely understood the threat of losing competitive advantages. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, my assistant, asking if I'd reviewed the agenda for tomorrow's operations team meeting. I had indeed reviewed it, and I'd also spent considerable time the previous evening crafting what would be my final presentation to the people who'd worked alongside me for years without fully understanding the scope of what we'd accomplished together. The Morrison Industrial Operations team consisted of 12 department heads and senior managers, most of whom had been with the company for at least 7 years. They were competent professionals who'd implemented my directives efficiently, but they'd never been given the full picture of how their individual contributions connected to the company's overall success. Tomorrow's meeting would change that. I'd structured the presentation to accomplish 2 objectives simultaneously. First, to provide the team with a comprehensive understanding of their collective achievements, ensuring they could articulate their value to the company regardless of what happened during the upcoming restructuring. Second, to create a clear record of my leadership role in developing and implementing the strategies that had driven Morrison Industrial's operational excellence. The presentation began with a timeline spanning my 12 years at the company, documenting the state of operations when I'd started as a junior analyst and tracking the improvements year by year. The early years showed a department struggling with basic efficiency metrics, plagued by supplier issues, quality control problems, and manufacturing delays that routinely pushed projects past deadline. By year 3, when I'd been promoted to operations coordinator, the metrics began showing steady improvement. Supplier performance ratings increased, quality defects decreased. On-time delivery percentages climbed from 62% to 81%. The correlation between my increased responsibilities and improved performance was undeniable. Years 4 through 7, during my tenure as senior operations manager, showed dramatic acceleration and improvement trends. This was when I'd implemented the integrated supplier management system, redesigned the quality control protocols, and established the cross-departmental communication standards that had become Morrison Industrial's operational foundation. The most recent 5 years, during which I'd functioned as everything but the official vice president of operations, showed the company achieving industry-leading performance metrics while expanding production capacity by 35%, without proportional increases in overhead costs. But the presentation's most powerful element wasn't the historical data. It was the forward-looking analysis that identified potential vulnerabilities in Morrison Industrial's operational structure. Vulnerabilities that would become critical risks during the restructuring process Marcus had planned. I'd identified 7 key operational dependencies that relied heavily on institutional knowledge and established relationships. The supplier qualification process that ensured quality while maintaining competitive pricing. The production scheduling system that balanced efficiency with flexibility. The quality assurance protocols that had eliminated costly recalls. The inventory management processes that minimized waste while preventing stockouts. The maintenance scheduling that maximized equipment uptime. The logistics coordination that ensured reliable delivery. The vendor relationship management that secured preferential treatment during supply shortages. Each of these systems represented years of refinement and optimization. Each relied on deep understanding of industry dynamics, supplier capabilities, and internal processes. Each would be vulnerable during leadership transitions, especially if the new leadership lacked operational experience. More concerning for Morrison Industrial's future, each system would be attractive to competitors who understood their value. I spent the morning refining the presentation, ensuring that every claim was supported by documented evidence, every metric was verifiable through company records, and every conclusion was logically derived from observable data. This wasn't emotional reaction to being passed over for promotion. This was strategic analysis presented with the same rigor I'd applied to operational challenges for 12 years. At 11:30, I drove to the Riverside Club for my lunch meeting with Patricia Holbrook. The club's understated elegance reflected the serious nature of our conversation. Patricia had reserved a private dining room, ensuring we could speak freely without concern about being overheard by Morrison Industrial contacts. Patricia Holbrook was everything I'd expected based on her reputation in the industry. Mid-50s, impeccably professional, with the confident bearing of someone who'd succeeded in executive roles through competence rather than politics. She greeted me with a firm handshake and the direct manner I appreciated in business dealings. "Sarah, thank you for making time on such short notice. I'll be direct about why I asked you here." She settled into her chair and opened a leather portfolio. Meridian Industries has been studying Morrison Industrial's operational performance for the past 18 months as part of our market expansion strategy. What we've discovered is fascinating and, frankly, puzzling. She pulled out a chart showing comparative performance metrics across major industrial manufacturers in the region. Morrison Industrial's numbers stood out clearly, showing superior performance in nearly every operational category. "Here's what puzzles us," Patricia continued. "Morrison's operational excellence doesn't correlate with their management structure or strategic investments. They're achieving results that should require significant capital expenditure and organizational sophistication, but their systems appear relatively basic from the outside." I smiled, understanding exactly what she'd observed. That's because the sophistication isn't in their systems. It's in how those systems are managed and optimized. Exactly. Which brings me to my next point. She leaned forward slightly. "We've identified you as the common factor in Morrison's operational improvements over the past decade. Your fingerprints are on every major efficiency gain they've achieved." The validation was gratifying, but I maintained my professional composure. "I've been fortunate to work with excellent teams on challenging projects." Patricia's expression suggested she wasn't buying false modesty. "Sarah, let's skip the diplomatic language. You've been functioning as Morrison's de facto head of operations for years, while they've kept you in a middle management position. Now they've promoted someone with no operational experience to the role you should have had." She paused. "We'd like to offer you the opportunity to apply your expertise in an environment that will actually value it." "I'm listening." "Vice President of Operations at Meridian Industries. Full executive authority over our eastern manufacturing facilities. Budget responsibility for a department twice the size of Morrison's operations division. Immediate participation in our executive planning committee." She slid a document across the table. "This is our initial offer, but I want to be clear that we're more interested in what you can accomplish than in negotiating compensation details." The salary figure was 47% higher than my current compensation at Morrison Industrial. The benefits package included equity participation, executive development opportunities, and performance bonuses tied to measurable operational improvements. But more important than the financial terms was the scope of responsibility and authority the position offered. "There's one additional element to this opportunity that I think you'll find particularly interesting," Patricia continued. "Meridian is planning an aggressive expansion into Morrison Industrial's primary market segments. We believe that superior operational efficiency will be our competitive advantage. Simply put, we want to beat them by being better at what they think they do well." The implications were clear. Meridian wasn't just offering me a better position. They were offering me the opportunity to demonstrate that Morrison Industrial's operational success had been dependent on expertise they'd just decided to overlook. "What would be your timeline for a decision?" I asked. "We'd like to move quickly. Ideally, we'd want you to start within 60 days, which would allow you to be fully operational before Morrison begins their restructuring process." Patricia's smile was knowing. "We're aware of their consulting engagement with Pinnacle Group. We think the timing could work very well for everyone involved." The lunch conversation continued for another hour, covering operational philosophies, strategic priorities, and cultural expectations at Meridian Industries. By the time we parted, I had a clear understanding of exactly what they were offering and why they wanted me specifically. The drive back to Morrison Industrial gave me time to process the magnitude of what was happening. 24 hours ago, I'd been a frustrated middle manager whose career seemed stalled despite excellent performance. Now I was looking at an executive position that would not only advance my career, but position me to compete directly against the company that had undervalued my contributions for over a decade. The afternoon brought 3 more inquiries from my previous evening's emails. 2 headhunters representing major industrial companies, and 1 direct contact from a former colleague who'd moved to a consulting firm specializing in operational transformation. Each conversation reinforced the same theme. My expertise was in high demand throughout the industry, even if Morrison Industrial had failed to recognize it. At 4 o'clock, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and liberating. I called Patricia Holbrook and accepted Meridian Industries' offer, pending final negotiation of start date and transition details. We agreed that I would provide Morrison Industrial with standard 2 weeks' notice, which would align perfectly with Meridian's timeline. The next morning brought the operations team meeting I'd been preparing for. 12 department heads and senior managers filed into the conference room, most of them expecting a routine update on quarterly performance metrics. Instead, they were about to receive a comprehensive education about their collective achievements and individual value within the industry. I began the presentation with a question that immediately captured their attention. How many of you could accurately describe Morrison Industrial's competitive advantages to a potential employer? The silence in the room was telling. These were experienced professionals who'd contributed to significant operational improvements, but they'd never been given the context to understand how significant those improvements actually were. Today's meeting has 2 purposes, I continued. First, to ensure you understand the full scope of what this team has accomplished over the past decade. Second, to prepare you for the changes that are coming to our industry and our company. I walked them through the comprehensive performance analysis I'd prepared, showing how Morrison Industrial's operational metrics compared to industry standards and competitors. Their expressions shifted from polite attention to genuine surprise as they realized the extent of their success. Our supplier performance ratings are in the 96th percentile industry-wide, I explained, clicking to the next slide. Our quality defect rates are 67% below industry average. Our on-time delivery performance exceeds 94%, compared to an industry average of 78%. Mark Stevens, our manufacturing coordinator, raised his hand. Sarah, these numbers are incredible. Why haven't we heard this before? Because operational excellence doesn't generate headlines like sales victories or marketing campaigns, I replied. But it's the foundation that makes everything else possible. Without operational reliability, Morrison Industrial couldn't make the delivery commitments that drive their sales success. I continued through the presentation, documenting how each department's improvements had contributed to the company's overall performance. The procurement team's supplier diversification had reduced materials costs while improving reliability. The quality control group's enhanced testing protocols had eliminated costly recalls. The logistics team's route optimization had reduced shipping costs by 18% while improving delivery times. Most importantly, I showed them how these improvements connected to Morrison Industrial's financial performance. Operational efficiency had enabled the company to bid more aggressively on major contracts, confident in their ability to deliver on time and under budget. Superior quality metrics had allowed them to command premium pricing in competitive markets. Reliable delivery performance had generated customer loyalty that translated directly to repeat business and referrals. This brings me to the second purpose of today's meeting, I said, advancing to the final section of the presentation. Change management and professional development. I outlined the restructuring plans that Marcus had shared with the senior management team, explaining how external consultants would be evaluating all operational processes for potential consolidation or elimination. I emphasized the importance of documenting their individual contributions and maintaining detailed records of their achievements. Restructuring processes often focus on cost reduction rather than value preservation, I explained. Your job over the next few months will be to ensure that decision-makers understand not just what you do, but why what you do matters to the company's success. The question and answer session that followed revealed both the team's sophistication and their vulnerability. They understood their technical responsibilities thoroughly, but they struggled to articulate their strategic value in business terms. They could execute operational improvements efficiently, but they hadn't been encouraged to think about how those improvements connected to competitive advantage. I spent the remaining hour coaching them on professional presentation skills, helping them translate technical achievements into business impact statements. We practiced elevator pitches that connected their work to measurable outcomes. We developed talking points that emphasized their unique expertise and industry knowledge. As the meeting concluded, Jennifer Martinez, our quality assurance manager, asked the question I'd been expecting. "Sarah, this feels like you're preparing us for something specific. Is there something we should know about your role in the restructuring?" I chose my words carefully. "I want each of you to be prepared for any scenario. The industry is changing rapidly, and the companies that will succeed are those that recognize and develop their operational talent. Whether that happens here at Morrison Industrial or elsewhere will depend on decisions that are still being made." The meeting ended with a sense of purpose and urgency that hadn't existed in the operations team for months. For the first time, they understood their collective power and individual value. More importantly, they were prepared to advocate for themselves during the uncertain times ahead. That afternoon, I finalized the transition documentation I'd been preparing for David Chen's assumption of operational responsibilities. The documents were comprehensive and professionally prepared, designed to provide him with every tool he'd need to succeed in his new role. They were also designed to make clear exactly how complex and interconnected the operational systems actually were. The documentation included detailed process maps for every major operational function, supplier contact lists with relationship histories, quality control protocols with implementation guidance, inventory management procedures with seasonal variations, maintenance schedules with equipment-specific requirements, and performance tracking systems with interpretation guidelines. Each document emphasized the importance of institutional knowledge and established relationships in maintaining operational efficiency. Each highlighted potential risk factors that required ongoing attention and expertise to manage effectively. Each demonstrated the sophistication behind what might appear to outsiders as routine operational management. I was particularly thorough in documenting the supplier relationships that had taken years to develop and optimize, the preferred vendor agreements that ensured priority treatment during supply shortages, the payment terms that had been negotiated based on long-standing performance history, the quality specifications that had been refined through countless iterations and improvements. These relationships represented competitive advantages that couldn't be replicated quickly or easily. They were based on trust, performance history, and mutual understanding that had developed over years of successful collaboration. They were also vulnerable to disruption if managed by someone who didn't understand their strategic importance. The evening brought final preparations for my departure from Morrison Industrial. I cleaned out my office systematically, ensuring that all company property remained while removing only personal items and documents I was legally entitled to retain. I organized my files according to company protocols, leaving clear documentation of project status and ongoing responsibilities. Most importantly, I prepared the letter of resignation that would accompany the transition documentation. The letter was professional, gracious, and strategic. It thanked Morrison Industrial for the opportunities I'd been given while expressing confidence in the company's future success. It offered to assist with the transition process within reasonable parameters. It emphasized my commitment to maintaining confidentiality regarding proprietary information and processes. What the letter didn't mention was my new position at Meridian Industries, my analysis of Morrison Industrial's operational vulnerabilities, or my assessment of the challenges David Chen would face in his new role. Those details would emerge naturally over time. As I locked my office for the final time, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 12 years of dedicated service, countless hours of overtime work, innovative solutions to complex problems, and consistent performance that had exceeded every expectation. All of it leading to a moment of clarity about my true value in the marketplace. Morrison Industrial had taught me everything I needed to know about operational excellence. They'd provided me with experience managing complex systems, developing supplier relationships, and optimizing processes for efficiency and quality. They'd given me opportunities to prove my capabilities and develop my expertise. They'd also taught me everything I needed to know about corporate politics, gender bias, and the gap between performance and recognition. They'd shown me how excellence could be taken for granted, how contributions could be minimized, and how talent could be overlooked when it didn't fit conventional expectations. Tomorrow would bring my final day at Morrison Industrial, the delivery of my resignation letter, and the beginning of a new chapter in my professional life. A chapter where my expertise would be valued appropriately, where my contributions would be recognized and rewarded, and where I'd have the authority to implement the kind of operational improvements I'd been developing for over a decade. But tonight, as I drove home through the city streets I'd traveled for 12 years, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my early days at Morrison Industrial. Excitement about the possibilities ahead, and confidence in my ability to create my own professional destiny. The game indeed was about to change dramatically, and for the first time in years, I was going to be playing by rules that actually worked in my favor. My final morning at Morrison Industrial dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the office windows as I arranged the carefully prepared folders on Marcus Bennett's desk. The resignation letter sat prominently on top, its cream-colored envelope bearing his name in my precise handwriting. Beneath it lay the comprehensive transition documentation I'd spent weeks preparing, each section meticulously organized and color-coded for easy reference. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. For 12 years, I'd walked into this building as someone seeking approval, validation, and recognition from people who'd consistently failed to provide any of those things. Today, I was walking out as someone who finally understood her true worth in the marketplace, armed with opportunities that exceeded anything Morrison Industrial had ever offered. Jennifer was already at her desk when I arrived, her usual bright smile tinged with sadness. Over the years, she'd become more than just my assistant. She'd been my ally in navigating the complex dynamics of corporate life, my early warning system for political shifts, and often my only source of honest feedback about how my initiatives were being received throughout the organization. "The conference room is ready for your 10 o'clock with Marcus," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure we weren't being overheard. "And Sarah? I want you to know that working with you has been the highlight of my career here. You've taught me more about professionalism and excellence than anyone else in this company." The genuine emotion in her voice caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on my own frustrations with Morrison Industrial that I'd sometimes forgotten how my leadership style had influenced the people who worked most closely with me. Jennifer's words reminded me that my years here hadn't been entirely wasted. They'd created relationships and had impacts that extended beyond my own career trajectory. "Thank you, Jennifer. That means more to me than you know." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "I hope you'll remember what we've accomplished together. The systems we've built, the processes we've improved, the standards we've maintained. Those things have value, regardless of how they're recognized officially." She nodded, understanding the subtext. Jennifer had witnessed every slight, every instance of credit being given to others, every time my contributions had been minimized or overlooked. She'd also seen the results of my work, the steady improvements in departmental performance, the positive feedback from suppliers and contractors, the respect I'd earned from peers throughout the industry. The morning hours passed slowly as I completed final administrative tasks, returned company equipment, and ensured that all outstanding projects had clear status documentation. Each completed task brought me closer to freedom, but also deeper into reflection about the journey that had brought me to this point. At 9:45, I gathered the materials for my meeting with Marcus, including several items he wouldn't be expecting. Along with the resignation letter and transition documentation, I'd prepared a comprehensive analysis of Morrison Industrial's operational dependencies, a detailed assessment of the risks associated with the upcoming restructuring, and a forward-looking evaluation of the company's competitive vulnerabilities. These documents weren't required as part of my departure process, but they represented my final professional contribution to an organization that had shaped my career for over a decade. They also served a strategic purpose, demonstrating the depth of my understanding and the scope of knowledge that would be walking out the door with me. Marcus was reviewing quarterly budget reports when I knocked on his office door. He looked up with the distracted expression of someone whose attention was focused on financial metrics rather than human dynamics. The stress lines around his eyes had deepened since our conversation about the promotion, and I wondered how much of that stress was related to the challenges David Chen was already encountering in his new role. "Sarah, come in. I understand you wanted to discuss some transition issues?" He gestured toward the chairs across from his desk, his tone suggesting he expected a routine administrative meeting. "Actually, Marcus, I have some important information to share with you." I placed the folders on his desk, with the resignation letter positioned prominently on top. "I think you'll want to review this carefully." He opened the envelope with the casual confidence of someone who assumed he knew what it contained. I watched his expression change as he read the first paragraph, confusion giving way to surprise, surprise giving way to alarm. "This is a resignation letter," he said, as if stating the obvious would somehow change the reality. "Yes, it is. Effective 2 weeks from today, as specified in my employment contract." Marcus set the letter down and looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. "Sarah, I have to say this is unexpected. If this is about the promotion decision, I hope you understand that these choices are never personal. They're based on what's best for the organization." I maintained my professional composure, even as I marveled at his ability to convince himself that systematically overlooking qualified women was somehow an objective business decision. "This isn't about the promotion, Marcus. It's about alignment between my career goals and the opportunities available here at Wharton Industrial." "What opportunities are you referring to?" His tone sharpened, and I could see him beginning to calculate the implications of my departure. "I've accepted a position as Vice President of Operations at Meridian Industries. I'll be overseeing their Eastern manufacturing facilities and leading their expansion into new market segments." The color drained from Marcus's face as the full impact of my announcement hit him. Meridian Industries wasn't just any competitor. They were Wharton Industrial's primary rival in the regional market, the company that had been steadily gaining ground through aggressive pricing and superior operational efficiency. "Meridian Industries," he repeated slowly. "Sarah, you understand there are confidentiality agreements, non-compete clauses." "I've reviewed my employment contract thoroughly," I interrupted smoothly. "The non-compete provisions are limited to direct solicitation of Wharton Industrial clients, which I have no intention of doing. My new role focuses on operational improvement and strategic development within Meridian's existing framework." Marcus reached for the second folder, his hands moving with the urgency of someone who sensed he was losing control of the situation. The transition documentation was comprehensive and professional, but it also made clear the complexity of the systems and relationships I'd been managing. "This is quite detailed," he said, scanning the table of contents. "I wanted to ensure that David has every resource he needs to succeed in his new role. The supplier relationship summaries include contact histories, contract terms, and performance metrics. The process documentation covers standard procedures as well as exception handling. The system architecture diagrams show how different operational components interact." What I didn't mention was how the documentation also revealed the interconnectedness of systems that appeared simple on the surface, but required deep institutional knowledge to manage effectively. The supplier relationships that looked routine but depended on personal trust, built over years of collaboration. The quality control processes that seemed standardized but required experienced judgment to interpret results and make adjustments. Marcus continued reading, his expression growing more concerned with each page. "Sarah, this level of complexity. David will need significant support during his transition. I'm sure he'll rise to the challenge. He has excellent credentials and the full confidence of the board." My tone was neutral, but the subtext was clear. David would indeed need significant support that would no longer be available once I left. "Perhaps we could discuss extending your departure date. Give us more time to ensure a smooth transition." I'd been expecting this request, and I'd prepared my response carefully. "I appreciate the concern, but I've already committed to my new position. Meridian Industries is expecting me to start in 2 weeks, and I intend to honor that commitment." The third folder contained the operational dependency analysis, and Marcus's reaction to its contents confirmed that he was beginning to understand the scope of what Wharton Industrial was about to lose. The document outlined 7 critical operational areas: where institutional knowledge and established relationships provided competitive advantages that couldn't be easily replicated. According to this analysis, you're suggesting that my supplier relationships are vulnerable to disruption, Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. I'm documenting the current state of those relationships and identifying factors that contribute to their stability, I corrected. Whether they remain stable will depend on how they're managed going forward. The supplier relationship assessment was particularly detailed, showing which vendors provided preferential treatment based on long-standing partnerships, which contracts contained favorable terms that had been negotiated over multiple renewal cycles, and which quality agreements required ongoing collaboration to maintain effectiveness. Marcus was smart enough to understand the implications without having them spelled out explicitly. These relationships represented millions of dollars in competitive advantages through better pricing, priority allocation during supply shortages, and quality assurance that eliminated costly defects and delays. Sarah, I think we need to discuss this situation more comprehensively. Perhaps you'd be willing to consider a counteroffer that addresses your career development concerns. The offer came too late and from the wrong motivation. Instead of recognizing my value proactively, Marcus was now reacting to the threat of losing competitive advantages he'd taken for granted. Instead of promoting me based on merit and performance, he was trying to retain me based on fear of what my departure might cost the company. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, but my decision is final. I've accepted the position at Meridian Industries, and I'm looking forward to the challenges and opportunities it will provide. He set down the folder and leaned back in his chair, clearly struggling to process the rapid shift in dynamics. 24 hours ago, he'd been confident in his assessment of my value to the organization and my limited options in the marketplace. Now he was facing the reality that I'd been significantly undervalued, and that my departure would create vulnerabilities he hadn't anticipated. What about your team? The operations managers who've worked with you for years? They're excellent professionals who understand their responsibilities and have the skills to execute them effectively. The transition documentation includes detailed information about ongoing projects and standard procedures. I paused meaningfully. Of course, the institutional knowledge and relationship management aspects of the role will take time to develop. The fourth folder contained the competitive vulnerability assessment, and Marcus's reaction to its contents told me everything I needed to know about how little thought he'd given to Morrison Industrial's operational dependencies. The document outlined areas where the company's competitive advantages relied heavily on expertise and relationships that couldn't be easily transferred or replicated. This suggests that our operational efficiency metrics could decline significantly during the transition period, Marcus said, his voice betraying his growing alarm. That's one possible outcome, I agreed. The actual impact will depend on how effectively the transition is managed and how quickly institutional knowledge can be rebuilt. What the assessment made clear, without stating it directly, was that Morrison Industrial's operational excellence had been built on years of accumulated expertise, refined processes, and carefully cultivated relationships. It wasn't the result of superior systems or strategic investments. It was the result of experienced judgment applied consistently over time. The final folder contained my forward-looking analysis of industry trends and competitive dynamics, positioned as helpful context for strategic planning purposes. The document outlined how operational efficiency was becoming increasingly important as a competitive differentiator, how supplier relationships were becoming more critical as supply chains grew more complex, and how companies with superior operational capabilities were gaining market share at the expense of those relying on traditional competitive advantages. According to this analysis, operational excellence will be even more important for future competitiveness, Marcus observed. Absolutely. Companies that can deliver superior quality, reliability, and efficiency will be able to command premium pricing and win competitive bids. Companies that struggle with operational challenges will find themselves at increasing disadvantage. The implication was clear. Morrison Industrial's operational advantages had positioned them well for industry trends that would make operational capabilities even more valuable. Those advantages were now at risk precisely when they were becoming most important for competitive success. Marcus closed the final folder and sat silently for several minutes, clearly processing the magnitude of what I'd presented. The resignation letter that had initially seemed like a personnel issue was now revealed as a strategic challenge that could affect Morrison Industrial's competitive position for years to come. Sarah, I have to ask directly, is this about revenge? About proving a point because of the promotion decision? The question revealed how little he understood about my motivations, but I answered it honestly. This is about professional growth and career advancement. Meridian Industries offered me opportunities that Morrison Industrial hasn't been willing to provide. Executive responsibility, strategic authority, and recognition for my contributions. The timing may seem related to recent events, but the opportunity itself is based on my professional qualifications and industry reputation. And you don't see any ethical concerns about joining our primary competitor? I see it as a natural career progression for someone with my expertise and experience. The industrial operations field is relatively small, and senior professionals regularly move between companies as opportunities arise. I met his gaze directly. Marcus, if Morrison Industrial had recognized my value and provided appropriate advancement opportunities, this conversation wouldn't be happening. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. For 12 years, I'd been hoping for recognition that had never come, opportunities that had never materialized, advancement that had been consistently denied. Now that I'd found those things elsewhere, Morrison Industrial was suddenly concerned about the consequences of their own decisions. What would it take to keep you here? What kind of offer would change your mind? I'd anticipated this question as well, and my answer was designed to make clear why it was too late for counteroffers. Marcus, the issue isn't compensation or title. It's about being in an environment where my contributions are valued, where my expertise is recognized, and where I have the authority to implement the kind of operational improvements I've been developing for over a decade. We could restructure your role, give you additional responsibilities. You could, but you've chosen not to. Instead, you've promoted someone with no operational experience to the position I've been performing for years. That decision tells me everything I need to know about how my contributions are valued here. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus exploring various scenarios for retaining me, and me politely but firmly declining each option. By the time we concluded, he understood that my departure was inevitable, and that Morrison Industrial would need to address the operational challenges my resignation would create. As I gathered my materials to leave, Marcus made one final attempt to minimize the situation. Sarah, I hope you understand that Morrison Industrial has survived many personnel changes over the years. We'll adapt to this transition as well. I'm sure you will, I replied calmly. Organizations are resilient, and you have excellent people who will step up to meet new challenges. What I didn't say was that those excellent people would be operating without the institutional knowledge, supplier relationships, and operational expertise that had enabled Morrison Industrial's success for the past decade. They would be learning through experience the difference between executing established procedures and creating optimized solutions to complex problems. The afternoon brought a series of meetings with department heads and senior managers, each conversation carefully crafted to ensure a professional transition while documenting the scope of knowledge and relationships that would be departing with me. I met with the procurement team to review supplier contracts and relationship histories. I briefed the quality control managers on ongoing compliance issues and certification requirements. I updated the logistics coordinators on delivery commitments and carrier relationships. Each meeting served dual purposes. Officially, I was ensuring continuity during the transition period. Unofficially, I was creating a clear record of the complexity and interconnectedness of the operational systems that had driven Morrison Industrial's success. The procurement meeting was particularly revealing. When I reviewed the supplier evaluation criteria and contract negotiation strategies that had secured favorable terms over the years, the team realized how much of their success had depended on my relationship building and strategic thinking, rather than on their administrative execution. Sarah, some of these contract terms are significantly better than industry standards, observed Chen, the senior procurement specialist. How were you able to negotiate such favorable pricing and payment terms? Long-term relationship building, consistent performance history, and strategic timing of negotiations, I explained. These suppliers know they can count on Morrison Industrial to honor commitments, pay promptly, and provide accurate forecasting. That reliability has value, and they've been willing to share some of that value through better contract terms. What I didn't mention was that those relationships were based on personal trust that had developed over years of interaction, trust that couldn't be transferred automatically to new relationship managers. The suppliers had worked with me directly on problem resolution, capacity planning, and quality improvements. They'd learned to rely on my judgment and expertise when making commitments to Morrison Industrial. The quality control briefing revealed similar dependencies. The certification maintenance protocols that ensured Morrison Industrial's compliance with industry standards weren't just procedural checklists. They required experienced interpretation of testing results, proactive identification of potential issues, and collaborative problem-solving with suppliers and customers. These quality metrics are impressive, noted Lisa Wang, the quality assurance manager. Our defect rates are consistently below industry averages, and our customer satisfaction scores are excellent. Those results reflect the integrated approach we've developed over the years, I explained. Quality isn't just about testing and measurement. It's about understanding how design decisions, supplier capabilities, manufacturing processes, and customer requirements all interact to create final outcomes. The logistics coordination meeting highlighted the sophisticated routing and scheduling optimizations that had enabled Morrison Industrial to promise delivery timeframes that competitors couldn't match, while maintaining cost efficiency that supported competitive pricing. Sarah, this delivery performance data shows we're consistently outperforming industry benchmarks, said Tom Rodriguez, the logistics coordinator. How sustainable are these performance levels? They're sustainable as long as the underlying systems and relationships remain stable, I replied carefully. The routing optimizations depend on real-time coordination with carriers. The scheduling algorithms require understanding of production capacity variations, and the commitment management requires integration between sales promises and operational capabilities. Each conversation reinforced the same fundamental reality. Morrison Industrial's operational excellence had been built on expertise and relationships that couldn't be easily documented or transferred. The competitive advantages they'd enjoyed were more fragile than they'd realized, more dependent on institutional knowledge than they'd understood. By late afternoon, word of my resignation had spread throughout the company, generating reactions that ranged from surprise to concern to speculation about implications for upcoming restructuring plans. Several colleagues stopped by my office to express personal regrets about my departure and professional concerns about how the operations division would manage the transition. David Chen appeared at my office door just before 5 o'clock, his expression combining nervousness with forced confidence. As the newly promoted vice president of operations, he understood that my departure would complicate his already challenging transition into executive responsibility. Sarah, I heard about your resignation. I have to say, I'm surprised by the timing. Professional opportunities don't always align with convenient timing, I replied diplomatically. But I've prepared comprehensive transition documentation to support your success in the role. I appreciate that. To be honest, I'm realizing that the operational responsibilities are more complex than I initially understood. I was hoping we could schedule some extended transition meetings to ensure I have all the background I need. The request was reasonable, and I was prepared to provide appropriate support within the constraints of my departure timeline. I'm certainly willing to help within the 2-week transition period. The documentation covers most of the essential information, but I'm happy to clarify specific issues or answer questions about particular processes. What about the supplier relationships? Some of these contracts and agreements seem quite specialized. The supplier relationship summaries include contact information, contract histories, and performance metrics. You'll want to schedule introduction meetings with key vendors to establish working relationships. I paused, choosing my words carefully. These relationships have developed over years of collaboration, so building trust and credibility will take time and consistent performance. David's expression suggested he was beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd inherited. The vice president of operations position wasn't just about overseeing departmental activities. It required deep understanding of integrated systems, complex relationships, and industry dynamics that couldn't be learned quickly or easily. Sarah, can I ask why you decided to leave now? I mean, you've been here for 12 years. You know the systems better than anyone. I've accepted a position that offers better alignment with my career goals and professional aspirations, I replied. Sometimes change is necessary for growth, even when it involves leaving familiar environments. The subtext of our conversation was clear. I was departing because Morrison Industrial had failed to recognize my value, and David was inheriting responsibilities that he wasn't yet qualified to handle. The success or failure of his transition would depend largely on how quickly he could develop the expertise and relationships that I'd accumulated over more than a decade. As the workday ended, I completed my final administrative tasks and prepared to leave Morrison Industrial for the last time as an employee. The building that had been my professional home for 12 years would become just another office complex tomorrow, a place where I'd once worked rather than a place where I belonged. Jennifer had prepared a small farewell gathering in the conference room, attended by the operations team members who'd worked most closely with me over the years. The mood was bittersweet, combining genuine sadness about my departure with excitement about the opportunities ahead, and concern about the challenges they would face without my guidance. Sarah, you've been more than just our manager, said Jennifer Martinez, our quality assurance manager. You've been our advocate, our teacher, and our example of what professional excellence looks like. Morrison Industrial is going to realize very quickly what they've lost. The sentiment was echoed by others in the room, each person sharing specific examples of how my leadership had influenced their professional development and career growth. Their words reminded me that my years at Morrison Industrial hadn't been entirely defined by frustration and disappointment. They'd also created meaningful relationships and positive impacts that would continue regardless of organizational changes. As I cleaned out my office for the final time, carefully separating personal items from company property, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 12 years of dedicated service, countless hours of problem-solving and optimization, innovative solutions that had saved millions of dollars, and countless headaches for colleagues and customers. But more importantly, 12 years of learning about my own capabilities, developing expertise that was valued throughout the industry, and building a professional reputation that had created opportunities I'd never imagined when I'd started as a junior analyst. The resignation letter on Marcus's desk would be opened and read tomorrow morning, beginning a process of organizational adjustment that would reveal the true scope of what Morrison Industrial had taken for granted. The transition documentation would provide David Chen with the information he needed to begin learning his new responsibilities, while also making clear how much he didn't yet know. The competitive vulnerability assessment would eventually be shared with the board of directors, creating conversations about operational dependencies and strategic risks that should have happened years earlier. The industry trend analysis would inform strategic planning discussions that would highlight the growing importance of exactly the kind of operational excellence that Morrison Industrial was about to lose. But tonight, as I locked my office door for the final time and walked toward the elevator that would carry me out of Morrison Industrial forever, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete confidence in my professional value and excitement about opportunities that actually matched my capabilities. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I smiled as I realized that after 12 years of trying to prove my worth to Morrison Industrial, I was finally walking away to join an organization that had recognized that worth from the very beginning. Tomorrow would bring the start of my real career, the one where my expertise would be valued, my contributions would be recognized, and my potential would finally be unleashed. 3 weeks into my tenure at Meridian Industries, I was reviewing quarterly production forecasts when my phone buzzed with a text message that made me smile. Linda Morrison Webb had sent a simple message: emergency board meeting called. David requesting immediate assistance. Chaos brewing. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was settling into my spacious new office overlooking Lake Michigan, developing strategic plans for operational expansion, and implementing efficiency improvements that were already showing measurable results, Morrison Industrial was discovering exactly what they'd lost when they'd decided I wasn't leadership material. My first 3 weeks at Meridian had exceeded even Patricia Holbrook's optimistic expectations. The operational assessment I'd conducted revealed inefficiencies that could be corrected quickly, supplier relationships that could be optimized significantly, and process improvements that would deliver immediate cost savings while enhancing quality metrics. More importantly, I'd gained the respect and cooperation of Meridian's operations team through a leadership approach that emphasized collaboration, professional development, and shared success. The contrast with Morrison Industrial's hierarchical culture was striking, and the results were already evident in improved morale and increased productivity. Patricia knocked on my office door, carrying a stack of reports and wearing an expression of satisfied confidence. "Sarah, the preliminary results from your supply chain optimization are remarkable. We're seeing 12% cost reduction with improved delivery reliability. The board is going to want a full presentation next week." "I'm happy to prepare that presentation," I replied, setting aside the forecasts I'd been reviewing. "The optimization is just the beginning. Once we complete the vendor consolidation and implement the quality improvement protocols, we should see even better results." "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Patricia continued, settling into the chair across from my desk. "We've been monitoring Morrison Industrial's performance metrics since you joined us. The changes are quite dramatic." She opened her laptop and displayed a comparative analysis showing Morrison Industrial's operational performance over the past month. The decline was subtle but consistent across multiple categories. Delivery times had increased by an average of 3 days. Quality defect rates had risen by 8%. Customer satisfaction scores had dropped by 12 points. "These changes are exactly what we hoped to see," Patricia said, with professional satisfaction. "Morrison's operational advantages are eroding, which creates opportunities for us to win competitive bids and attract their customers." I studied the data carefully, noting patterns that confirmed my predictions about Morrison Industrial's vulnerabilities. The supplier relationship disruptions were manifesting as delivery delays and quality inconsistencies. The process management challenges were creating inefficiencies that translated directly to increased costs and reduced reliability. "The timing is fortunate," I observed. Morrison is beginning their restructuring process with Pinnacle Consulting while simultaneously dealing with operational performance declines. That combination will create significant internal pressure. My phone rang, displaying a number I recognized immediately. Thomas Chen, Morrison Industrial's largest client and the CEO of Chen Manufacturing Solutions. We'd worked together on numerous projects over the years, and he'd always appreciated my direct communication style and problem-solving capabilities. "Sarah Rodriguez," I answered professionally. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I got your new contact information from Linda Morrison Webb." His voice carried the stressed undertone of someone dealing with unexpected complications. "I understand you've moved to Meridian Industries." "That's correct, Thomas. I'm now Vice President of Operations here. How can I help you?" "We're having some significant issues with our Morrison Industrial contracts. Quality problems, delivery delays, communication breakdowns. These are problems we never experienced when you were managing our account." He paused, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "I'm wondering if Meridian Industries would be interested in discussing alternative arrangements for our manufacturing support services." The call lasted 20 minutes, during which Thomas outlined the scope of Chen Manufacturing's requirements and his dissatisfaction with Morrison Industrial's recent performance. By the end of our conversation, we'd scheduled a comprehensive presentation meeting for the following week, discussing how Meridian Industries could provide the operational reliability and quality assurance that Morrison Industrial was no longer delivering consistently. After hanging up, I shared the development with Patricia, who immediately understood the strategic implications. Chen Manufacturing represented $8 million in annual contracts for Morrison Industrial. Losing that client would be a significant financial blow, but more importantly, it would signal to other major clients that Morrison Industrial's operational reliability was declining. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity we were hoping your expertise would create," Patricia said. "But I want to make sure we handle this ethically and professionally." "Absolutely." Thomas Chen approached us directly because of service quality issues with his current provider. "We'll compete based on our operational capabilities and value proposition, not by disparaging Morrison Industrial or exploiting confidential information." The following days brought additional inquiries from Morrison Industrial clients who'd heard about my move to Meridian Industries. Each conversation followed the same pattern. expressions of concern about recent service quality declines, questions about Meridian's capabilities, and requests for proposals that would allow them to evaluate alternative providers. Meanwhile, intelligence from my contacts within Morrison Industrial painted a picture of escalating internal pressure. David Chen was struggling to manage supplier relationships that required years of trust building to maintain effectively. The operations team was working overtime to address quality control issues that had been prevented proactively under my leadership. Senior management was demanding explanations for performance declines that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Linda's updates were particularly revealing. The board of directors had called 3 emergency meetings in 2 weeks to address operational concerns that were affecting client relationships and competitive positioning. Marcus Bennett was facing intense scrutiny about the decision to promote David Chen over more experienced candidates. The Pinnacle Consulting engagement was being accelerated to address immediate performance issues rather than long-term strategic optimization. David presented his 90-day operational assessment to the board yesterday, Linda texted. Recommended hiring external consultants to rebuild supplier relationships and implement new quality control systems. Board asked why these systems needed rebuilding if they were working 3 weeks ago. The question revealed the board's growing understanding of what Morrison Industrial had lost when I'd departed. Systems that had appeared robust and self-sustaining had actually depended on expertise, relationships, and institutional knowledge that couldn't be easily transferred or replicated. Marcus Bennett's desperate phone call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing proposals for Meridian's facility expansion project. His voice carried the strained politeness of someone making a call he didn't want to make but couldn't avoid. Sarah, I hope you're settling in well at your new position. Thank you, Marcus. I'm very pleased with the opportunities here at Meridian Industries. I'm calling because we're experiencing some transitional challenges that we believe you might be able to help us address. On a consulting basis, of course. We'd be willing to pay premium rates for your expertise during this adjustment period. The offer was both flattering and revealing. Morrison Industrial was now willing to pay me as an external consultant more than they'd ever paid me as an employee, seeking to purchase back the knowledge and relationships they'd decided they didn't need when they'd promoted David Chen. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, but my current role requires my full attention and commitment. The timing wouldn't work for external consulting arrangements. Sarah, I want to be direct with you. We're dealing with some significant operational issues that are affecting our client relationships. Issues that didn't exist when you were managing these systems. I understand operational transitions can be challenging, I replied diplomatically. I'm sure David will develop the expertise needed to address these issues effectively. The board is asking difficult questions about our recent personnel decisions. There's concern that we may have underestimated the impact of your departure on our operational capabilities. The admission was as close to an apology as Marcus Bennett was capable of offering. He was acknowledging, without stating it directly, that Morrison Industrial had made a strategic error in failing to recognize my value, and that they were now paying the price for that error. Marcus, organizational changes always create adjustment periods. Morrison Industrial has excellent people who will rise to meet new challenges. What would it take to bring you back? What kind of offer would interest you? The question I'd been expecting finally arrived, delivered with the desperation of someone watching competitive advantages evaporate in real time. Marcus, I'm very happy in my current role. Meridian Industries has provided me with opportunities for growth and advancement that align perfectly with my career goals. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Marcus exploring various scenarios for my return and me politely but firmly declining each option. By the time we concluded, he understood that Morrison Industrial's operational challenges would need to be solved without my assistance. That evening, Patricia Holbrook invited me to dinner at the Meridian Industries Executive Dining Room, a tradition for celebrating significant achievements. The Chen manufacturing contract signing had been finalized that afternoon, representing the largest client acquisition in Meridian's recent history. Sarah, in 3 weeks you've already exceeded our expectations for your first quarter performance, Patricia said, raising her glass in a toast. The operational improvements, the new client acquisitions, the strategic insights you've provided, it's exactly what we hoped for when we recruited you. Thank you, Patricia. The success has been a team effort, and I'm grateful for the support and resources Meridian has provided. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. The board has asked me to explore accelerating our market expansion timeline based on the opportunities your expertise has created. Instead of gradual growth over 18 months, they're considering aggressive expansion over the next 6 months. The proposal was ambitious, but achievable given Morrison Industrial's declining competitiveness and the client interest we'd been generating. Accelerated expansion would require additional operational capacity, enhanced quality control systems, and expanded supplier relationships. But these were exactly the kind of challenges I'd been preparing for throughout my career. I think accelerated expansion could work very well, I replied. We'd need to be strategic about capacity building and quality maintenance, but the market conditions are favorable for aggressive growth. The following week brought the Chen manufacturing presentation, delivered to their executive team in Meridian's newly renovated conference facility. The presentation showcased our operational capabilities, quality assurance protocols, and cost efficiency advantages compared to their current provider. More importantly, it demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and operational expertise that Morrison Industrial was no longer providing. Where Morrison's recent proposals had focused on cost reduction through service limitations, our proposal emphasized value creation through operational excellence. The difference in approach is remarkable, Thomas Chen observed during the question and answer session. Morrison Industrial has been trying to solve cost problems by reducing service levels. Meridian is proposing to reduce costs while improving service quality. That's exactly our philosophy, I explained. Operational efficiency should enhance value delivery, not compromise it. When systems are optimized properly, cost reduction and quality improvement happen simultaneously. The Chen Manufacturing Contract Award was announced the following Friday, along with news that 2 other Morrison Industrial clients had decided to evaluate alternative providers. The ripple effects were becoming visible throughout the industry, as clients questioned whether Morrison Industrial's recent performance declines represented temporary adjustment issues or fundamental operational problems. Linda's weekend text message provided insight into Morrison Industrial's internal reaction. Emergency board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. Marcus and David both presenting. Rumor is they're considering leadership changes in operations division. The speed of Morrison Industrial's decline had surprised even me. I'd expected operational challenges and client relationship difficulties, but the magnitude of the performance deterioration suggested that their systems had been more dependent on my expertise than anyone had realized. Monday morning brought confirmation of Morrison Industrial's crisis through an industry newsletter that reported on the company's recent client losses and operational challenges. The article quoted unnamed sources expressing concern about Morrison's ability to maintain service quality during their restructuring process. More significantly, the article mentioned that Morrison Industrial was evaluating organizational changes to address recent operational challenges, which indicated that David Chen's position was in jeopardy less than 2 months after his promotion. Patricia forwarded me the article with a brief note, faster than we expected. Board meeting this afternoon to discuss our response strategy. The Meridian Industries board meeting focused on capitalizing ethically and professionally on Morrison Industrial's difficulties while positioning ourselves for sustainable long-term growth. The conversation emphasized maintaining high service standards, investing in operational capacity, and building client relationships based on value delivery rather than competitive criticism. We're winning clients because we're providing superior service, not because we're exploiting Morrison's problems, Patricia emphasized. That approach will serve us well regardless of how quickly Morrison Industrial recovers from their current challenges. My role in the board presentation was to outline our operational capacity for handling accelerated growth while maintaining quality standards. The analysis I provided showed that Meridian could handle a 50% increase in client volume over 6 months, without compromising service delivery, assuming strategic investments in equipment and personnel. The board approved the accelerated expansion plan unanimously, along with authorization for capital investments that would position Meridian Industries as the region's premier industrial operations provider. The transformation from Morrison Industrial's overlooked middle manager to Meridian's strategic growth leader was complete. That evening, as I reviewed the expansion timeline in my office, I reflected on how dramatically my professional situation had changed in just 4 weeks. Morrison Industrial had spent 12 years teaching me everything I needed to know about operational excellence, while consistently failing to recognize my contributions or provide advancement opportunities. Now I was applying that expertise in an environment that valued strategic thinking, rewarded performance, and provided authority to implement the kind of operational improvements I'd been developing for over a decade. The contrast wasn't just about titles or compensation. It was about being in an organization that understood the connection between operational excellence and competitive advantage. My phone buzzed with a final text from Linda. David Chen resigned today. Board announced temporary leadership structure while they search for experienced operations executive. Marcus looks 10 years older. The message confirmed what industry observers had been predicting for weeks. Morrison Industrial's crisis had reached the point where cosmetic changes were no longer sufficient. They needed fundamental restructuring of their operational leadership, rebuilding of client relationships, and restoration of competitive capabilities that had taken years to develop. Meanwhile, at Meridian Industries, we were building exactly those capabilities, from a position of strength, guided by expertise that had been proven through more than a decade of operational excellence. The future had never looked brighter, and the possibilities had never been more exciting. 6 months after my departure from Morrison Industrial, I stood at the podium of the National Industrial Operations Conference, delivering the keynote address on transformational leadership and operational excellence. The audience of 300 industry executives included several familiar faces from Morrison Industrial, including Marcus Bennett, who sat in the back row with the expression of someone watching his former employee receive recognition he'd never thought to provide. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The woman who'd been deemed lacking in natural leadership qualities was now being celebrated as an industry innovator, sharing strategies that had transformed Meridian Industries into the region's fastest-growing industrial operations company. Operational excellence isn't about managing systems, I explained to the engaged audience. It's about understanding that every process, every relationship, every efficiency improvement connects to competitive advantage. Leaders who recognize this connection can create sustainable value that transforms entire organizations. During the presentation, I outlined the strategic framework I'd implemented at Meridian Industries, showing how integrated operational improvements had delivered 43% revenue growth, 67% improvement in client satisfaction metrics, and industry-leading efficiency ratings across all manufacturing categories. The case study resonated particularly strongly because it demonstrated results that every operations executive in the room wanted to achieve in their own organizations. The questions afterward revealed genuine interest in understanding how theoretical operational concepts could be translated into measurable business outcomes. After the presentation concluded, I was approached by Rebecca Martinez, the newly appointed CEO of Morrison Industrial. She'd been brought in by the board to lead the company's recovery after Marcus Bennett's resignation and the operational crisis that had followed my departure. Sarah, congratulations on an excellent presentation. Your achievements at Meridian Industries are genuinely impressive. Her tone was professional but carried undertones of someone making a conversation she'd been planning for months. Thank you, Rebecca. I understand Morrison Industrial is navigating some significant organizational changes. We are indeed. Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you today. She glanced around the crowded conference area and suggested we continue our conversation in a quieter location. We found a secluded corner of the hotel lobby, away from the conference attendees and industry networking conversations. Rebecca's directness reminded me why she'd been successful in turning around struggling organizations throughout her career. Sarah, I'll be completely honest with you. Morrison Industrial is facing competitive challenges that require exactly the kind of operational expertise you've demonstrated at Meridian Industries. The board has authorized me to extend an offer that reflects our recognition of your true value to the industry. She outlined a comprehensive package that included the title of Chief Operations Officer, Executive Committee membership, equity participation, and operational authority that exceeded anything Morrison Industrial had ever offered to anyone. The compensation was 70% higher than my current role at Meridian Industries. The position would report directly to me, with full autonomy over operational strategy and implementation. You'd have the resources and authority to rebuild Morrison Industrial's operational capabilities according to your vision. The offer was professionally attractive and personally satisfying, representing complete vindication of my capabilities and value. Morrison Industrial was now prepared to provide everything they'd refused to consider when I'd been their most dedicated employee. Rebecca, I appreciate the offer and the confidence it represents. However, I'm very fulfilled in my current role at Meridian Industries. We're in the middle of exciting expansion projects that align perfectly with my professional goals. I understand your loyalty to Meridian, but consider the impact you could have at Morrison Industrial. You'd be rebuilding operations from the ground up, implementing systems based on everything you've learned about industry best practices. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Rebecca emphasizing the strategic importance of operational leadership and the board's commitment to supporting transformational changes. Her persistence reflected Morrison Industrial's desperate need for the expertise they'd once taken for granted. What would change your mind? Rebecca asked finally. What would Morrison Industrial need to offer to interest you in returning? I considered the question carefully before responding. Rebecca, the issue isn't about compensation or authority. It's about organizational culture and strategic alignment. Meridian Industries recognized my value from the beginning and provided opportunities for growth and innovation. Morrison Industrial had 12 years to make that recognition and chose not to. But people change. Organizations evolve. The Morrison Industrial you'd be joining would be fundamentally different from the one you left. Perhaps. But the Morrison Industrial I'm building competition against will continue to face challenges as long as they're trying to rebuild capabilities they once had rather than innovating beyond what they've achieved before. Rebecca's expression showed she understood the implications of my response. Morrison Industrial wasn't just competing against Meridian Industries for market share. They were competing against the operational standards I'd helped establish, standards that continued to evolve and improve under my leadership at Meridian. The conference concluded with industry recognition that positioned Meridian Industries as the emerging leader in operational innovation. The awards ceremony included recognition for our client satisfaction achievements, efficiency improvements, and strategic growth that had redefined competitive expectations throughout the region. As I accepted the award for Operational Excellence Innovation, I looked out at an audience that included competitors, clients, and former colleagues, who now understood the value that Morrison Industrial had failed to recognize for over a decade. The following week brought news that Morrison Industrial had hired Patricia Chen, a respected operations executive from the West Coast, as their new Chief Operations Officer. The industry newsletter that announced her appointment also mentioned that Morrison Industrial was implementing, quote, comprehensive operational restructuring based on contemporary industry best practices. The restructuring plans sounded remarkably similar to the improvements I'd been implementing at Meridian Industries, suggesting that Morrison Industrial was now trying to recreate the capabilities they'd lost, rather than developing innovative approaches to operational challenges. Meanwhile, Meridian Industries continued expanding based on sustained competitive advantages and innovative operational strategies that stayed ahead of industry trends rather than following them. Our client base had grown by 87% since my arrival. Our operational efficiency metrics exceeded industry leaders, and our strategic planning emphasized sustainable growth rather than short-term recovery. 3 months later, I received an unexpected phone call from Linda Morrison Webb, who'd retired from Morrison Industrial after 30 years with the company. Her voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd watched justice finally prevail after years of witnessing institutional unfairness. Sarah, I wanted you to know that the board's post-crisis analysis identified your departure as the single most significant factor in Morrison Industrial's operational decline. They've completely restructured their leadership development and promotion processes. That's encouraging for their future success, I replied diplomatically. More importantly, they've established the Linda Morrison Leadership Initiative, focused on identifying and developing undervalued talent throughout the organization, particularly women and minorities who demonstrate exceptional capabilities but may not fit traditional leadership profiles. The initiative represented institutional acknowledgement of the systemic problems that had contributed to Morrison Industrial's crisis, but it also validated the experiences of countless professionals who'd faced similar challenges throughout their careers. As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from frustrated middle manager to industry leader. Morrison Industrial had taught me everything I needed to know about operational excellence, while simultaneously demonstrating everything wrong with traditional approaches to leadership recognition and professional development. The contrast had created opportunities for innovation and growth that exceeded anything I could have achieved within Morrison Industrial's constraints. More importantly, it had provided the foundation for building something better, something that aligned operational excellence with leadership recognition and professional advancement. My assistant knocked on my office door, reminding me of the afternoon board meeting where we'd be reviewing expansion proposals that would establish Meridian Industries as the dominant regional player in industrial operations. The proposals represented growth that had been achieved not through acquisition or market manipulation, but through sustained operational excellence and strategic innovation. Looking out at the city skyline from my executive office, I smiled at the thought of how dramatically my professional narrative had changed. Marcus Bennett had been right about one thing. Leadership did require natural qualities. But those qualities weren't about appearance or social dynamics. They were about vision, competence, and the ability to create value through strategic thinking and operational expertise. Morrison Industrial had spent 12 years developing those qualities in me while failing to recognize their presence. Now those qualities were driving competitive success that exceeded anything they'd achieved during my tenure as their unrecognized operational expert. The afternoon board meeting concluded with unanimous approval for expansion plans that would establish Meridian Industries' national presence within 18 months. As I walked back to my office, I encountered my reflection in the hallway mirror and saw something I'd never seen during my years at Morrison Industrial. A respected industry executive whose contributions were valued, whose expertise was recognized, and whose leadership was making a measurable difference in organizational success. The phone call that evening came from Thomas Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Industrial Solutions, and a potential client who'd been recommended by 3 existing clients. His company was considering a strategic partnership that would represent Meridian Industries' largest contract to date. Sarah, your reputation in the industry is remarkable. Our due diligence consistently identifies you as the key differentiator in Meridian's competitive advantages. We'd like to discuss how your operational philosophy could transform our manufacturing efficiency. As I scheduled the meeting that would likely secure Meridian Industries' position as the industry's premier operational consulting firm, I realized that success had redefined itself completely. Morrison Industrial had measured my value based on how well I executed their vision. Meridian Industries measured my value based on how effectively I created competitive advantages through strategic innovation. The difference wasn't just about recognition or compensation. It was about being in an environment where leadership meant solving problems creatively rather than maintaining existing systems efficiently. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.